My name is Vivian Hale, and at 68 years old, my own son decided I'd stopped being a person and started being a problem to manage. He didn't ask me a single question about it. He booked a tour. We were sitting in my kitchen, the one I've made coffee in every morning since 1991, when he slid a glossy folder across the table toward me and smiled like he was doing me the biggest favor of my life. Mom, Bianca and I found the most wonderful place. It's a memory care community out past the lake. We took the tour Tuesday. You're going to love the courtyard. His wife nodded along beside him, already half out of her chair, already checking the time on her phone like the matter was settled, and she had somewhere better to be. And here's the thing, the two of them were so sure of that morning, the thing they'd built an entire plan around. They thought they knew whose name was on what. They were wrong. They had it backward in a way they couldn't begin to imagine. And that brochure for memory care, with its watercolor gardens and its smiling models who were younger than my own children, wasn't even the worst thing tucked in my daughter-in-law's bag that day. I picked up my coffee. I took a slow sip. I let the kitchen go quiet for a beat longer than was comfortable for anyone but me. And then I said one calm sentence that pulled the floor right out from under every plan they'd made without me. But I'm getting ahead of myself, and if you're going to understand how a quiet woman in a cardigan dismantled a scheme 3 people spent a month building, you need to know who I am first. Welcome to Brave Mom Stories, where the women everyone underestimated find out exactly how much steel they've been carrying all along. If any part of this feels like your own kitchen, your own family, your own careful little voice telling you that you might be the one who's confused, then you are exactly who I'm telling this to. Stay with me. Leave a comment and tell me where you're listening from. And let me tell you how this actually went. I spent 31 years as a bookkeeper and then a licensed tax preparer in a county where everybody knew everybody. I did the books for half the small businesses on Main Street. I prepared returns for farmers and dentists and a man who ran the only hardware store within 40 miles. I know what a 1099 looks like at a glance. I know the difference between a lien and a levy. I know that the IRS doesn't care about your feelings, and neither does a county recorder's office. And I built a 30-year career on being the calm person in the room when other people's numbers fell apart. My husband, Ray, used to say I had a tax season temperament. Don't panic, don't argue, just find the paper that proves it. Ray passed 11 years ago, a heart attack in the garage on a Sunday afternoon while he was changing the oil in a truck he didn't even like. I was 57. One day I was a wife, and by the next Sunday I was a widow with a mortgage and a kitchen full of casseroles I couldn't taste, so I did what I knew how to do. I went back to work full-time. I kept the books, I paid down the house, and a few years later, when a little duplex 2 streets over went into foreclosure, I bought it at the courthouse steps with money I'd scraped together one tax season at a time. I rented out one side and I held on to it. I paid this house off the spring I turned 61, and I cried at the kitchen table when the recorded deed came back in the mail with no lender's name on it anywhere. Just mine. Just Vivian R. Hale. People look at a quiet woman in sensible shoes and they assume the quiet means simple. My family started making that assumption a few years back, and I let them, which was the mistake that almost cost me everything. They began talking about me in those soft, padded voices people use around the elderly and the dying. Mom's slowing down. Mom repeats herself. Did you notice she forgot Bianca's birthday? I did not forget my daughter-in-law's birthday. I remembered it perfectly and chose not to spend $40 on a candle for a woman who'd never once thanked me for anything. But you can't explain that to people who've already decided what your silence means. So I stopped explaining. I'd kept a little card taped to my desk drawer for 30 years, something an old escrow officer told me when I was 24 and green. The title doesn't care who sleeps in the house, it only cares whose name it carries. I never once imagined I'd need that line at my own kitchen table against my own boy. But there it was, coming for me, and the son sliding me pictures of a courtyard had no idea that the very generosity he was using as proof I was confused was the thing that was going to end him. Let me back up to how this started, because it didn't start with a brochure. It started about 8 months before that morning, with my son's business. My son has always wanted to be a bigger man than the one he is. There's no cruelty in saying that, just arithmetic. He opened a contracting company about 6 years ago, and for a while it did fine, and then he expanded too fast the way men do when they confuse a good year for a guarantee. He bought trucks he didn't need and hired a crew he couldn't keep busy. By last spring he was underwater, and his wife, who has expensive taste and a thin patience for being merely comfortable, was not handling it well. I knew some of this because my daughter told me, and the rest I pieced together the way I pieced together a messy set of books. By watching which numbers didn't add up. What I didn't know, what I wouldn't find out until much later, was that sometime that spring, my son sat down at a kitchen table that was not mine and decided that his mother's duplex, the one I'd bought at the courthouse steps, was the answer to his problem. Here's a detail that matters, and I want to be plain about it, because a lot of people get tangled up on exactly this point. You cannot borrow money against a house you don't own. A bank won't write you a home equity line of credit on a property that isn't in your name. So my son had a problem, because the duplex was in my name, clean, with 15 years of property tax bills mailed to me, with my signature on every page of the original closing. There was no honest road from his debt to my equity, so he found a dishonest one. He had his wife draw up a durable power of attorney, a real-looking one, on real-looking letterhead, naming him as my agent with my signature at the bottom. A signature I never wrote. They took it to a notary 2 counties over who barely glanced up, and then they took that forged power of attorney to a lender and opened a $190,000 line of credit against my duplex. My duplex, to pay down his trucks and his crew and whatever his wife thought she deserved. I didn't know any of this in the spring. I found out the way I find out everything, through the mail. A statement came to my house in July, addressed to me, from a bank I'd never done business with, regarding a line of credit I'd never opened, secured by a property I owned outright. For 1 full minute, I thought it was a scam, the kind of thing they warn you about on the morning shows, somebody fishing for old people. Then I read the property address. Then I read the borrower's name. And then I sat down very slowly at my kitchen table, the same table, and I felt something cold and clear move through me, the same feeling I used to get when a client's books had a hole in them, shaped exactly like a person. I didn't call my son. That was the first decision I made, and it was the right one. A loud, frightened old woman calling her son in tears. That's a woman who proves their story for them. I'd worked enough fraud-adjacent messes in my career to know that the moment you let the other side see you panic, you've handed them the narrative. So I didn't call anyone. I made a fresh pot of coffee. I got out a legal pad, and I started doing what I've always done. I built a file. I drove to the county recorder's office, and I pulled the records on my own duplex, and there it was, a new lien recorded in May, the bank's name sitting on my title like a stain. I requested copies of the loan file. I requested a copy of the power of attorney they'd relied on. And when it came, I sat in my car in the parking lot and looked at my own forged signature, and I'll tell you, it was a bad forgery. My Vivian had a loop in the V I've never made in my life. Bianca always did have more confidence than skill. Now, a younger woman, or an angrier one, might have marched straight to the police that afternoon. I thought about it. But I'm a bookkeeper, and bookkeepers don't make the entry until the whole transaction is documented. And I had a feeling, a cold tax season feeling, that the forged loan was not the end of their plan, but the middle of it. Because here's the problem they still had. I was alive, I was competent, and I owned the duplex they'd just borrowed against. If I ever found that statement, I could blow the whole thing up. So they needed me to be the kind of person whose word didn't count. They needed me confused. They needed me declared. And sure enough, 2 weeks after I found that statement and said nothing, my son started talking about memory care. It came in pieces the way these things do. A comment at a Sunday dinner about a neighbor who'd let things go too long before getting help. A forwarded article about the warning signs of decline. My daughter-in-law asking, in that bright, terrible voice, whether I'd been sleeping all right, Whether I'd been remembering to take my pills, whether maybe I'd been a little more forgetful lately. I hadn't, I sleep fine. But I watched the trap being built around me, and I let them think I didn't see the lumber. Then came the kitchen, and the folder, and the courtyard. When my son slid that brochure across the table, and his wife checked her phone, I set down my coffee and I said, "That's a beautiful courtyard. Did the tour include the part where you tell me how much it costs, or the part where you tell me why you forged my signature to borrow $190,000 against my duplex?" I want to tell you that the room exploded. It didn't. It did something better. It froze. My son's face went through about 4 expressions in 2 seconds, and not one of them was innocence. His wife's phone hand stopped moving. And in that frozen second, I learned everything I needed to know, because an innocent man asks, "What are you talking about?" A guilty one says nothing at all, and my son said nothing at all. Then he recovered, the way he always recovers, by getting indignant. "Mom, I don't know what you think you found, but you're clearly not well, and this is exactly what we've been worried about. You're paranoid. You're accusing your own son of," and on, and his wife joined in. And the two of them spent 20 minutes pivoting from "we love you and want you safe" to "you're delusional and dangerous," which, if you've never watched it happen at your own table, is a remarkable thing to witness. They had decided, on the spot, with no plan, that the way out of being caught was to double down on the very story they needed, that I was confused, that I imagined things, that nothing I said could be trusted. I let them talk. I've learned that people will tell you the whole shape of their plan if you just stay quiet long enough to let them fill the silence. And by the time they left my kitchen that morning, my son red-faced and his wife already on her phone in the driveway, I understood exactly what was coming. They weren't going to quietly hope I never noticed the loan. They were going to get ahead of it. They were going to have me declared incompetent, fast, so that when I tried to report the forgery, I'd be a confused old woman making wild accusations, and a fresh, durable power of attorney, a legal one this time, would put my son in charge of everything I owned. So I sat down at my table, the same table, and I built the rest of the file. I want to be clear about something, because the comments on stories like mine always snag on this, and rightly so. A healthy 68-year-old woman does not need memory care. Memory care is for people with real dementia, real decline. People who wander and forget their own children's faces. There's a whole world of difference between that and independent living, and even more difference between any of it and a woman who does her own taxes and reads the fine print on her own loan statements. The fact that my son reached straight for memory care, the most locked-down option there is, told me everything about what he actually wanted. He didn't want me cared for. He wanted me contained. Somewhere, I couldn't sign a document or talk to a banker or call the sheriff, while he cleaned up the mess he'd made with money that was never his. So the first thing I did was take that off the table for good. I called my doctor of 19 years, and I sat in her office and told her the whole thing, the loan, the brochure, the "you're not well." She didn't gasp, and she didn't pat my hand. She reached for her referral pad. "We're going to get you a full neuropsychological evaluation," she said. "A complete battery, memory, judgment, executive function, the works. We date it, we document it, and we make it bulletproof." It took most of a day, that evaluation. They had me draw clocks and remember word lists and count backward from 100 by 7s, which, I'll have you know, I did faster than the young man administering the test. A week later, the report came back, signed and sealed. Cognition fully intact across all domains, no evidence of any impairment, and the examiner noting, in writing, that I presented as a sophisticated historian of my own financial affairs. I read that line 3 times and laughed out loud in my kitchen. The second thing I did was lock my estate up so tight that no forged anything could ever reach it again. I went to see a lawyer, a sharp woman in her 70s named Geraldine Voss, who'd handled a few closings for clients of mine over the years and did not suffer foolishness in any form. She read my situation in about 4 minutes flat. "They're running a capacity play," she said, the same way my doctor had recognized the eval. It's the oldest one in the book. And the forged power of attorney, That's not just civil, honey. That's a felony. We're going to take care of both. She drew up a revocable living trust and moved every asset I owned inside it. This house, the duplex, my accounts, all of it, with a durable power of attorney and a healthcare directive naming the two people in my life who'd never once approached me with an angle. My daughter and Geraldine herself. Not my son, not his wife. By the time they filed anything in any court, there would be nothing left for them to grab and no door they could open. And the third thing I did, the thing that turned out to matter most, was nothing. I waited, because I knew they couldn't help themselves, and I was right. The email went out on a Wednesday. My son sent it to 26 relatives. The subject line was, "An honest update about Mom," and reading it was one of the strangest experiences of my life, because the woman he described, declining, paranoid, lashing out, threatening her own family, was someone I'd never met. He wrote that I'd been making disturbing accusations. He wrote that they were heartbroken, but that the family needed to come together to make a loving plan for Mom's care before something terrible happened. A loving plan for Mom, whether Mom wanted one or not. The replies came in within the hour, and they were a masterclass in how people behave when they've heard only one side. "So sorry, you're such a good son. Whatever you need, we're here for the family." One cousin, a man I'd lent money to in 1998 and never been repaid, wrote, "Viv was always headstrong. This doesn't surprise me." Headstrong. Yes, I bought a house at a courthouse auction being headstrong. I raised 2 children alone being headstrong. I sat in my kitchen and read 26 relatives decide I was a problem to be solved, and I felt something harden in me that has never softened back. Then my daughter called, and that was the part that actually hurt. My daughter lives 2 states away, and she has spent her whole life avoiding conflict the way some people avoid the dentist by pretending the ache will pass. "Mom," she said, "I don't want to take sides," which is, of course, what people say when they've already chosen one and want credit for not admitting it. "He says you've been saying some pretty scary stuff. He says you accused him of stealing." "He forged my signature, sweetheart," I said. "He took out $190,000 against the duplex. I have the loan file. I have the power of attorney I never signed. I have the recorded lien." "That's not an accusation. That's a record." There was a long silence on the line, the kind I recognized from when she was small and had been caught at something. "He says you'd say that," she finally managed. "I'm sure he did," I said. "Did he also say there's going to be a family meeting?" She went quiet again, and I knew I'd guessed right. "He's setting one up. At your house. He thinks if everybody's there, you'll see reason." "Oh, I'll be there," I said. "I wouldn't miss it. And honey, when it's over, I want you to remember that I told you exactly what was true before you walked in, and you decided that not taking sides was a side. We're going to have to live with that, you and me." She didn't say anything. I let her sit in the quiet a moment, the way I used to when she was 9, and had broken something, and was hoping I'd forget to ask. They scheduled it for a Saturday afternoon in my own living room, which was a special kind of arrogance, holding the trial in the defendant's own house. And before I tell you how it went, I need to tell you about the box. When my mother died, she left me almost nothing, because she'd had almost nothing. But she left me a tin strongbox, gray, dented, with a little key, the box where she kept the few papers that mattered. Her marriage license, her own mother's photograph, the deed to the half-acre she fought a bank to keep through the worst of the 70s. I've kept my own important things in that same box my whole adult life. The day before the family meeting, I sat down and I packed it carefully, the recorded deed to the duplex, in my name, clean, the forged power of attorney, with that wrong loop in the loan file. My neuropsychological report, signed and sealed, my new trust documents, and one photograph I dug out of an album the night before that I'd cried over for an hour and then wiped my eyes and decided to bring. I'll tell you about the photograph when we get to it. It earned its place. Saturday came. They arrived like a delegation. My son and his wife, of course, and a handful of the cousins who'd replied to that email, the church friend who'd known me for 30 years and somehow believed an email over a phone call she never bothered to make. My daughter flew in and sat on the edge of the couch like she might bolt. And there was one person I hadn't expected, and her presence changed the whole afternoon. My granddaughter, my son's own girl, home from her sophomore year of college, who took one look at the room arranged like a courtroom with her grandmother as the accused, and quietly came and sat down right next to me. I didn't ask her to. She just did. 20 years old, and she had more spine than every adult in that room. My son opened it the way he'd open a job site meeting. He'd clearly rehearsed. He talked about concern and love and wanting what's best. He passed around a folder, and the cousins murmured. He had a doctor's name in there, somebody who'd never met me, who'd written a paragraph based entirely on what my son had told him. He had the memory care brochure again, with a date circled, a move-in date, the 1st of next month, like I was a piece of furniture with a delivery window. And he had a fresh power of attorney, a real one this time, and a pen, set on my coffee table, waiting for me to be reasonable. I let him finish. I let all of them finish. The cousin who said it broke his heart, the church friend who said she'd prayed about it. I sat with my granddaughter's hand on my arm, and I let the room empty itself of words. And then I reached down beside my chair, and I set the gray tin box on the coffee table, right next to that pen, and I opened the lid. Before anybody signs anything, I said, I'd like to show you what's actually in my house, since we're all so worried about whether I understand it. I took out the recorded deed first and I set it down. This is the deed to the duplex on Sycamore, my name, recorded in 2010. 15 years of property tax bills, all mailed here, all in my name, all paid by me. If anyone in this room believed they owned that property, the county would have been mailing the tax bill to them. It's never gone anywhere but this house. I took out the loan file next, and I watched my son go very still. In May of this year, somebody opened a $190,000 line of credit against that duplex. I laid the forged power of attorney beside it. Using this, a durable power of attorney, naming my son as my agent, with my signature at the bottom. Except I never signed it. I've never signed anything with that loop in the V in my life. This is a forgery, notarized 2 counties over, and forging a financial power of attorney to encumber someone else's property is a felony in this state. I've already given certified copies to a detective in the financial crimes unit. The bank's fraud investigator has them too. The lien is being challenged, and the lender is, understandably, very interested in who walked into their branch with a notarized document and a wrong signature. The room had gone the kind of quiet you could pour. My daughter-in-law had stopped breathing. My son opened his mouth, and I didn't let him have it. Then there's the question of whether I'm competent to understand all this. I laid the sealed report on the table. Full neuropsychological evaluation, 3 weeks ago, every domain, signed by a board-certified examiner. Cognition fully intact, he wrote, and I'm quoting that I'm a sophisticated historian of my own financial affairs. I'd be glad to read it to a judge. In fact, given that someone in this room sent a doctor who's never met me a letter recommending I be locked in memory care, I imagine I'll have to. And then I laid down the trust documents. Last thing. Everything I own, this house, the duplex, my accounts, is now inside an irrevocable arrangement. The law won't let any of you near. I did it 3 weeks ago, while my son was circling a move-in date on a brochure. There is no signature you can collect today, real or forged, that will reach $1 of it. So you can put the pen away. I want to tell you my son apologized. He didn't. What he did was worse, and somehow more honest. He looked at the deed with his name nowhere on it, and at the forgery with that wrong loop, and at the loan file with a detective's name in the margin, and his face did the arithmetic. And then he stood up, smoothed his jacket the way he does, and said, flat, as a shut door, "We'll talk to a lawyer." And he walked out. No sorrow. Just calculation, recalculating. His wife was already gathering her bag, already in the driveway, before he reached the door, the 2 of them retreating to figure out which of them the bank was going to come for first. My daughter sat with her hands over her face and would not look at me. And I'll be honest, that was the only part of the afternoon I didn't enjoy. Because she'd had the whole morning to choose and the whole room to choose in, and she'd chosen to wait and see twice. That's not the same as cruelty. But it isn't innocence either, and we both knew it. The cousins didn't say, "It's for the best" anymore. They gathered their coats. A couple of them mumbled the embarrassed kind of apology, the kind that comes too late to mean much, but still counts for a little. The church friend couldn't meet my eyes. And then it was just me and my granddaughter still sitting close, and one old friend from down the street who'd come because I'd asked her to be a witness and had said nothing the whole time. Just watched. But there was one thing left in the box, and I'd promised myself I'd do it, even though it was the part I dreaded most. Before my son reached the door, I said his name, the one I called him when he was small, and he stopped. I reached into the box and took out the photograph, and I turned it around so he could see it. Him at 31, his wife beside him, my granddaughter, a fat-cheeked baby on her hip, the three of them standing in the doorway of the Sycamore duplex on the day they moved in. Because here is the part of the story they'd both forgotten, the part that made the whole thing unbearable. When my son's first business failed, years before this one, when they had a newborn and nowhere to go, I bought that duplex. I bought it so my son and his wife and my brand new granddaughter would have a roof I knew no creditor could ever take, because it was in my name and only mine. I let them live in one side for nearly 2 years, rent-free, until they got back on their feet. I never asked to be thanked. I never brought it up again. I thought that was what love looked like, the quiet kind, the kind that doesn't keep a ledger. "You moved into this house with your daughter on your hip," I said, "because I made sure no bank could ever put you out on the street. And this spring, you forged my name to put a bank's lien on the exact same roof I bought to keep over your head. You took the safest thing I ever built for you, and you used it as the blueprint to lock me away." My voice didn't rise. I'd promised myself it wouldn't, and a promise to yourself is the only kind nobody else can break. Concern is a gift. You turned mine into a mortgage. And then you sent it back to me as a bill. He looked at the photograph, and for just a second, just one, I saw the boy in him, the one who used to fall asleep in the back of the truck. And then the man took over again, and he turned and walked out the door of the house I own, into the afternoon, to go find out exactly how much trouble he was in. Here's how it landed, in the plain numbers I've always trusted more than feelings. The forged power of attorney went to the Financial Crimes Unit, and the bank's fraud investigators were not amused to learn they'd written a $190,000 line of credit on a document with a signature the borrower's own mother could disprove with a sample. The lien against my duplex was removed within 90 days. The debt remained, but it was theirs now, the ordinary way, without my equity to hide behind, and they downsized to a rented apartment, both their names on the lease, the kind of honest paperwork they'd spent a year trying to avoid. There were charges. I won't pretend that was easy to watch my own boy, fingerprinted. But I didn't sign that forgery. He did. And a mother who covers up a felony to protect her son's pride isn't loving him. She's just paying his next bill in advance. The competency case was never filed, because you don't bring a capacity claim against a woman holding a sealed neuropsych report and a county deed, and the doctor who'd written that paragraph without ever meeting me stopped returning my son's calls the moment my lawyer sent him a copy of the real evaluation. My daughter called a week later, crying, saying she should have believed me, that she didn't know it had gone so far. I told her I knew she didn't, and that knowing wasn't the same as showing up, and that we'd be all right, but it would take a while. We talk now, carefully, the way you walk on a floor you're not yet sure will hold. My granddaughter and I are closer than we've ever been. She came back for the whole summer. She helped me clean out the duplex between tenants, and one afternoon she asked me, quietly, how I'd known to start a file before I had any proof of the meeting, and I told her the truth. I didn't know. I just made the entry as the transactions came in, one document at a time, and trusted that an honest ledger always tells the story in the end. She's thinking about going into law now. I didn't push it. I just left Geraldine's card on the counter. My son sent a long message a few months after, and it was exactly the kind I'd expected. Full of, "I only ever wanted you safe, and I can't believe you'd do this to your own family." And not one word, not a single one, that admitted he'd written my name in his own hand. I read it once. I didn't answer. Some letters don't earn a reply, only a closed lid. I took the memory care brochure off my counter where it had sat for months, that watercolor courtyard, those models younger than my children. I folded it once and tucked it inside the old loan file, the lie folded into the record that beat it. And I dropped them both in the recycling bin on a Tuesday morning with the coffee grounds. Then I put the deed and the photograph back in my mother's gray tin box where the safe things live, and I turned the little key and I set it on the shelf where it's always been. The house is mine. It always was. The duplex is mine, free and clear again. And I've learned, late but not too late, that the quiet I'd trusted my whole life to speak for me had never said a word. That love which keeps no record can't defend itself. And that concern, the real kind, is a gift you hand someone with open palms, never a key you cut to your mother's front door. If anything in this made you think about whose name is actually on the papers in your own family, don't wait. Go look this week, and if you've got someone who needs to hear a woman won by staying calm and keeping the receipts, send this to her. I'll be right here, in my kitchen, in my house, making the coffee, and I'll see you in the next one.